Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Reconnect with Plant Wisdom. It's me, Tigria Gardenia. This episode is so powerful because it completely reframes something that we have been indoctrinated to a certain extent. We've been taught since we were little, especially if you grew up in North America, you have lived with these series of myths. And Elspeth Hay really just cuts through it and talks about the myths around food and what it means to be part of your ecosystem and how the ecosystem where you live needs you. Not this idea that we as human beings are separate and that we should be like, staying away from nature and not entering into it, but that instead we need to find our place in it. And specifically, we need to find our place in the ecosystem as beings of nature who are part of the web of life. And that includes feeding and being fed and this whole relationship. And all of this for her started with an acorn. Yes, acorns are edible. And there is so much that we are going to be going into. You are absolutely love it. And more importantly, we're going to bust one of the biggest myths out there, which is the name of this episode, because this is episode 123, The Myth of No Farm and No Food with Elspeth Hay. I hope you enjoy. Welcome to Reconnect with Plant Wisdom. I'm your host, Tigria Gardenia, nature-inspired mentor, certified life coach, and the founder of the Naturally Conscious community. For over a decade, I've been known as a world ambassador for plant advocacy, working closely with plants to share their practical wisdom to help you consciously embody the elements of life that nourish your evolution. In this podcast, I delve into ancient and modern knowledge from biology to spirituality about the wondrous ways of plants. Together, we'll explore how ecosystem thinking helps you overcome limiting beliefs, understand the true nature of relationships, and live an authentic, impactful life. Elspeth, when you and I first spoke, I love that you made a comment because I gave you my little spiel that I always give everybody that my podcast is all about like working with plants. And you were like, so excited, so excited. And I loved it. So before we start, we kind of dive into everything that you have discovered about, acorns, because that's like the core of your love. Please tell everybody, who is Elspeth?
I am a mother and a journalist and a gardener and now a basket weaver. That's a new part of me. And I live on Cape Cod in the middle of the Cape Cod National Seashore, which is out into the Atlantic about 90 miles in a big oak and pitch pine forest that's mostly protected. And I love it there. I feel really lucky to be there.
Beautiful. And I already have a few like I had a few questions jotted down, but now you've just in those few words you added a few more to me. But you're not just a journalist, you're an author. I mean, you've authored a book which is very much connected to plants. Tell us about the book.
Yeah, the book just came out. I guess I'm still getting used to adding author to the to the
Add it to
lineup.
your repertoire, girl. It's yours. You've earned it.
Yeah, yeah. It's only been like a week or two that the book's been out in the world as of this time that we're talking. So my book is called "Feed Us with Trees, Nuts, and the Future of Food," and it's been about a 5-year journey doing the research, putting together proposal, and writing, and it all started when I learned that we can eat acorns, and this oak forest around my house that I had always seen as an impediment to food production because it's all protected and can't be cleared for farmland. Suddenly, I started seeing things in a really different light, and a lot of stories that I had held my whole life just started unraveling and rewriting and going in all new directions. So, yeah, it's been a pretty fun ride.
I like how I love how you just said, this forest that I look as an impediment because it can't be cleared for agriculture, which in my mind, I'm like, thankfully, Thankfully. But I guess I had never thought about it as the opposite, the idea of people who do wanna create farmland because they think that that is the way to add and to feed, and all of a sudden you're like, "Here's this forest in the middle of it." How did you even start with this? Like, how did you start going down this rabbit hole?
Yeah. Well, so I grew up in Maine in a community that had a lot of farmland. So I was, I grew up going with my parents to the farmer's market. I knew a lot of farmers as a kid, and I knew sort of the good and the bad of farming. I learned as a kid, what industrial agriculture was doing to our land and our water and our air. And it made me incredibly sad that this most basic need, like our need to eat food, was destroying wild places and the habitat of other creatures. But it was also a little bit of a double edged sword because I also really enjoyed, obviously, all the food that these farmers were growing and going to the farmers market. And so when I moved to Cape Cod, to this place that has almost no farmland, because for a few reasons, partly because like 70% of the land in my town and on the outer Cape is protected, but also because it's so sandy that even where people do have land, it's pretty hard to grow row crops. I just sort of was looking for the farmers market, looking for the locally produced food, and there is some, but I always thought, oh, the forest is just in the way. We can't have that here. And someone sent me, so I became a reporter, a journalist for the radio station here, and my beat is food and the environment. So I've been talking to people about food and the environment for more than 15 years, and no one had ever mentioned eating acorns. And then a friend sent me this TEDx talk by a woman in Greece named Marcy Mayer, and she was originally from California, and she said that acorns are edible and they're a superfood and one of humans' oldest foods. And I was like, wait, what? And so that was kind of what started my journey. And I went completely down the rabbit hole, like started reading everything I could find about people eating acorns, all different cultures. And then from acorns expanded into other tree nuts. So chestnuts and hazelnuts and walnuts, just couldn't stop reading basically and talking to people and trying to learn more.
Yeah, the whole thing of acorns, I've heard it over the years in different from different people in different ways because I live in an area that is very chestnut rich. And
Mm.
most people think that the chestnuts here are actually native, but it turns out that they weren't. And when in around the 1800s, there was a massive famine, and a duchess in the area discovered the whole idea of the superfood that is chestnuts. Not only chestnuts, but chestnut trees and everything that comes from that particular plant. And so she ended up encouraging them to be planted all over the place. So this is an area that's very rich in them because, as you said, they're a superfood. It's like really nutrient dense. It's good brain food, we call it here. And then the tree also grows very tall, very straight. So great for poles, for vineyards, and other kinds of things. And the only problem is that the chestnut leaves are very acidic, so that when they fall down, they actually create like the ecosystem doesn't know how to handle it. So you have to kind of treat the whole thing differently. But we also have a lot of oak, and nobody around here, even though we talk a lot and we gather and we have this is, we do chestnut festival, and we have everything from chestnut flour to, eating chestnuts in so many different ways. One of my favorite things is butter and chestnut, which they do up in the mountains here. It's like delicious, but
Oh,
nobody really talks about the acorns. It's kind of like this art. In part, I had heard, but I'd love to hear from you more. As it's because also you have to, you have to work at it to eat an acorn. It's not like pick it up and maybe boil it for 5 minutes like you do a chestnut and you can eat. Like, why do you think that it's been this lost art, and the fact that these are edible plants, that in so many different ways?
it really depends on where you are. So when I first started talking to people about acorns, I thought, oh, we're talking about acorns, right? An acorn is an acorn. But of course, that's not true. There's hundreds of different species of oaks, and all of their nuts are a little bit different. So the first acorn eaters who I started getting to know were in present day California. So I got to know an indigenous man named Ron Reed. He's a medicine man, biologist, and his people, the Karuk people, have eaten acorns since time immemorial as a staple food. So one of their biggest foods. And it turns out that the acorns from the tan oak tree where he lives are much easier to leach. So acorns have to be processed, like you mentioned. They have these bitter tannins in them,
Hmm.
which on the one hand are kind of cool because they're an amazing preservative. So acorns have this food safety storage life that is almost unlike anything else. They can last for decades in their shells, just waiting to be cracked. Um, but on the other hand, it's a pain in the butt, and you have to get the tannins out in order to eat them because just like olives, right? So olives have those exact same compounds. Probably where you are, more people have tried to eat an olive straight off the tree and had the terrible experience of realizing how incredibly disgusting and bitter it tastes and spitting it out. But obviously, that hasn't stopped us from making olives a major
A
food.
staple food.
Yeah, yeah. So, but the thing about tannins is that they're water soluble. So, it depends on what you're making, right? If you're making olive oil, the tannins don't get into the fat. So you can just press the olive
Right.
and get that oil out without any tannin. But if you're making table olives, you have to soak them in brine and or you can use lye. And the same is true actually. I started learning when because I would say, "Ron, how do you process your acorns?" "Oh, we just pour water through a few times and then they're sweet." And then I would try that with my acorns, and it would be like, no, they're not. They're still really bitter. They don't taste good at all. And as I started talking to more people in different places, I learned that people in different places created different techniques to deal with the tannins because some tannins are more stubborn than others, and they leach differently. They come out into water differently. So the answer is that I think we've lost a lot of really place specific knowledge. And in some places, it maybe made more sense for the acorns to be fed to pigs because they were just so hard to leach and such a pain in the butt that it wasn't worth it. In other places, it made more sense to make acorns into flour. In other places, people actually, there is acorn oil. It's this incredible orange color, and you can press it out of the acorn for some of the more oily species. And then in other places, people would leach the tannins out with lye, and lye sounds kind of scary, right? It's this like caustic, uh,
Exactly.
but it's used in traditional corn processing for nixtamalization. It's used in olive processing. So it's actually not that crazy to use it in acorn processing. It's just a skill that we've lost and forgotten.
And I find that so interesting to think about how acorns, who on one level, because working so long with plants, right? Oaks are just the cornerstone, like a keystone species in so many different places, and even iconic for so many people. Like there is this high level of recognition of an oak, and also of an oak's purpose in maintaining an ecosystem, right? The idea that you have this oak tree that carries out different functions throughout the course of that plant's life, where starting with nutrition and food and the acorns for the squirrels and the small animals, and then all these other functions that start to grow out of that as the tree grows in size, right? Opening little holes for lots of different species that can use the body, the root systems, the leaves. Like there is just this entire ecosystem that is created around oak, and they're revered by us as humans in so many stories and folklore and stuff like that. And yet this part of the food element, the element of the oak directly nourishing us in so many aspects, has been lost. And I just find it, yes, I know it's hard, but as you said, so are olives. Like it's not like, and there's lots of other kinds of plants out there that even the chestnuts themselves. Let me say, as a person who spends almost every year in the chestnut season collecting chestnuts and working with them, they're pretty, those husks are dangerous, man. You've got to come up with a technique. Some people use the foot technique. They like step on the husk and then with can like sneak in there to grab the nuts out. Other people have like thick gloves. Like there's techniques to do this, so it's not the easiest food either. And yet for so many of us, the idea of anything edible that is oak based just seems lost, completely lost. And I'm still shocked about it as I think about it more and more.
Yeah, I mean, it that was kind of what drew me in the first place was my parents were bird watchers. And so I had spent my whole life, learning about bird habitat and how important this tree was for wildlife. And there are so many efforts where I live to restore wildlife habitat. We have to have these trees for wildlife. We have to keep this land protected as a forest for wildlife. And I think that what's been lost from the conversation is that that's also human habitat.
And the
And
humans are wildlife too.
yeah, and we don't talk about ourselves as having a habitat. And I think that I had this experience of going down to Pennsylvania, which is about 6 or 7 hours south of where I live on Cape Cod. And there was a man there named John Hershey in the 1920s who, as part of recovery from the Great Depression, started experimenting with these fruit and nut tree nurseries. And he was actually part of the Roosevelt administration during the economic recovery from the Great Depression. And they were sending these trees out to these devastated communities. And, they were devastated economically, but also environmentally from a lot of clear cutting. And so his thought was, hey, we can basically create human habitat by sending these trees out, restoring the area ecologically, and restoring it in terms of food production for people who are starving right now. And it actually reached the highest levels of American government for a while. It fell apart, he got cancer, and World War II started. But for about 10 years there, it was this big thing. And so I heard that story, I got interested, and I heard that some of the trees were still standing. And I went down to what people were calling North America's oldest food forest. And I would add North America's oldest European American food forest because there's indigenous food forests everywhere. But
Good point. Good point to make.
yeah, uh, but it was a really cool. So we're like standing next to a nail salon, right? And there's these super old American persimmons. And then at the church, there's these huge bur oak trees, huge chestnut trees, just all scattered throughout suburbia. And it was kind of the first example that I had seen of someone trying to actually create human habitat in, at the time it wasn't as suburban, but he really took the landscape around his little town and was like, let's create a habitat that's for both humans and wildlife and livestock. Like, let's actually look at all the elements of life in this community and try to feed all of them with these trees. And when I started talking to the people down there, because there's this group who's been working to save the trees, one of them said something that really kind of upended my understanding of our food stories and my own food history. And he was like, yeah, humans need habitat. And so many of us here who are Euro American are refugees from our home countries where we lost access to traditional lands and traditional food production methods. And I was totally confused when he started saying that. That's not a history that we talk about in the US. I grew up as a little kid with the story that my ancestors came here because it's a land of opportunity. And that story, I mean, it's told in school, it's told again and again and again and again. And so I was sort of like weirded out when he said that, like, oh, we're all refugees. I was like, what? Like, what are you talking about? But when I started looking back through the history, he was totally right. And this whole land of opportunity story is kind of one written to cover up, I think, the real trauma of a lot of Euro Americans who immigrated here in the early like 1600s, 1700s, 1800s. So, yeah, I don't know. We can go deeper into that, but
I'd
that was
love to go deeper into it because as a person who, I also grew up in the United States. I grew up in South Florida where, it's on one hand, the idea of fruit trees are everywhere. When I was a kid, the idea of buying mangoes and avocados was like never came into our consciousness because people would show up at school with these giant bags filled with them saying, please take them. There's just so many. They're breaking our cars. Like you had to know where to park your car to make sure that they didn't come because they're huge there. Like the avocados are really giant and so are the mangoes. And they would, of course, land on your car and break your windshield or like dent your hood and stuff. So during the season, you knew not to park in those areas. And of course, we also have lots of coconut trees. And so there's certain things that were embedded into that still are embedded into the landscape, and that it's common to see somebody climb up to a coconut tree, grab a coconut, bring it back down, and even though we still buy them, but it's we have all these places, Palacio del Jugos, which is like this big location that makes all kinds of different juices because there are, sugar cane and all the other kinds of fruit that's there. But I remember that when I have a friend of mine who spent the last 20 years of her life, when she moved to South Florida, creating a food forest out of her home. And we've had so many discussions about like just it is lost to a certain extent. And then here I am, I live in northern Italy, where, as you said, like we don't have, like, the biggest cities, or Turin is about 45 minutes. I'm in the middle of the mountains, so 45 minutes to an hour away from me, and Milan is an hour and a half to 2 hours away from me. And so everything here is built like that. Like everything is around. I'm so happy. No offense to you cows, but the cows finally moved over to the different pasture from the one in front of my house because their bells keep me up all night with the clanging and the clanging, especially when the bull gets a little spicy and then there's like lots of clanging all over the place. Ooh, oof, it's craziness. But like once a year we have the wild garlic that surges in the area by the river, and so everybody goes down to grab. It's like this giant population of wild garlic, and we all go and we grab our years full. Or we still have like where we spend once a year creating the tomato sauce for the entire year. So giant production of tomato sauce plus all of the natural things. Persimmons, oh my goodness, we once had a work exchange that ended up harvesting. We had 2 persimmons trees in the house that I was living at the time, and I think we ended up with like 90 or 100 kilos of persimmons from these 2 trees, which was fantastic because I love persimmons, and you have to wait so long for them to ripen completely. But it's like it's just the way it is around here. It's all over the place. It's all around you. And so once you learn, you feel safe, you know where to get food, all these different pieces. And then you go to the United States and you're like, gotta go to a supermarket. Gotta go
Yeah.
to a supermarket. And that's scary as hell for people because it means if you don't got no money, you ain't got no money, you ain't got no food. And I feel like that is one of the major trauma points. One of those examples of that trauma of disconnection with nature, when I forget that I am nature, therefore it's natural for me to eat from the natural world and to have that relationship with food in that way, that they feed me and I feed them, and all of this piece. I feel like that causes so much trauma for people. And so our cities are built to instill trauma and separation. And that is just such a sad thing to see, that people flock to living in these cities, which have benefits. I have no problem with the density or with other aspects, but that disconnection, like you said, the fact that you can't have orange trees in the middle of the street that you just pick as you walk, or that we don't think anymore about the trees on our sidewalks and as part of our living ecosystem that we're in relationship with and also we're being nourished by. I feel like it instills this need of like, make money, make money, make money, make money, because then you're going to starve and you're not going to be able to do anything and you're not going to have any food and you're not going to be able to, all these types of pieces.
Yeah, well, and when I started looking back at the history, because I grew up with that story, I call it in the book, I call it the no farms, no food story. Just this idea that if we're not creating farms, there's nothing in the world for us to eat. We don't have a habitat. We're not like other species. We have to destroy these wild places just to meet this need. And I started trying to understand, once I saw, okay, that's really not true, I started trying to understand, well, then why do we think this, right? And I just followed my own ancestry back and back because it seemed like when I started looking at it, that really was a story in communities like mine where, it was a lot of European immigrants who have been here for a long time. And in more recent immigrant communities, people were still in relationship with a lot of these wild foods, still understand the world as edible, same as in a lot of indigenous communities. So I was trying to figure out, okay, where did we get separated? And the no farms, no food story, I started to realize as I read, was actually really intentionally written with the birth of colonialism and capitalism and this sort of internal colonization that happened in England and Europe prior to the spread of colonization into, North America, South America, Australia, all these other places. And the whole point of the story was that all these public lands, which were called commons in England, where my ancestors are from, were being privatized. And there was obviously, if you're taking something that belongs to the people where they have fed themselves for hundreds or thousands of years, there's going to be protest and there's going to be uprising. And people protested incredibly strongly. I had learned about the history of the witch trials and had just been told, oh, that was a weird religious thing. Well, actually, that was women protesting for rights to these former common lands and being the way that they addressed that and tried to shut that down was by saying that, oh, they were witches.
Right.
And in fact, tens of thousands of women were killed for the crime of trying to still harvest food or medicine or plant materials that they needed from these lands that they had once been allowed to harvest from and that were suddenly being privatized incredibly quickly. I have a map in the book of the amount of common land that was privatized in England. I forget the exact dates on that map, but it's in the span of about 100 years and it's like a fifth of the country. I mean, it's just huge
Right.
amounts of land being enclosed. And so that movement came to be known as the enclosures. And it came along with this incredible amount of propaganda to say, well, this is a good thing because now we can feed more people because the farmland is more productive when it's privatized. And those natural spaces, those ecosystems that we had before really didn't produce much. Now, of course, that's not true. That's not true at all. I spend a lot of time in the book looking at the yield question because that is some of the propaganda of the no farms, no food story that I had deeply internalized. Like, well, we have to have these farms because wild spaces don't produce enough food. They produce way more food. A healthy ecosystem produces way more food than a monoculture. So
Yep.
we've got to be able to let go of that. But I think in order to do that, we have to look back at this trauma and the fact that when a lot of early European immigrants came to North America, they tried to recreate these commons and did successfully for a time. There, before the close of the Civil War in the United States, any unenclosed land, so unimproved was the word they used, and that meant like it didn't have a building or it didn't have a fenced in farm field. That was a place where people could hunt, gather, fish, find medicine, water, weaving materials, building materials, anything they needed for life. They could turn animals out to graze there. And what happened here, which is an incredibly sad piece of our history, is this system, that they had worked so hard to get back after having to leave Europe when that land was enclosed. Then, after the close of the Civil War, when enslaved African Americans were freed, they were also feeding themselves from this common spaces. And white plantation owners who wanted cheap labor and who wanted the African Americans to still be forced to work on the plantations started that they were had the political power as well and the legal power. And within a year of the close of the Civil War, trespass lands in every southern state changed so that the hunting and gathering and the fishing and all these subsistence activities became illegal. And then that practice spread north and it spread west. And there was this incredible closing of the commons that we had worked so hard to recreate. So there's a lot of trauma there and a lot of disconnect that, when you go to school as a kid and you just hear like, oh, we came because it was a land of opportunity. And we have to have farms because they're so productive. And it's like, wow, you just swept a lot of history under the rug. And
Yeah.
maybe that's why so many of us are so confused about our relationship with the living world around us. I don't even like to use the term the natural world anymore, because that's just another way of drawing a line between us and all the other life in our ecosystems. And we're not separate from it, we're part of it.
Yeah, and you've touched on so many different points, like everything from the history that we've been told, and more of anything, the fear story that we've been told. Like anybody who spends time either in with indigenous cultures or who has survival training really learns that this whole separation piece, and that this whole idea of extraction and colonization, and that, oh, we have to do it this way because if not, like you said, we can't survive, or any of these pieces, is actually just bull. And it's everything that we've been told, unfortunately, that makes us like makes us dependent on somebody, and that's really kind of the focus point. Not only that, but I think what we don't realize is that we think, oh, that no, some people think that, oh, well, you're just talking about the fact that people don't want to go and fish or don't want to do those things. Sure, okay, there might be people who don't want to, but the problem is we're all afraid of it. We don't know how to do it, so therefore you're you're cultivating this whole point of, like you said, separation, division, fear, worry, all these other pieces. And so not only have we eliminated history that was so important to remember, and we've changed dynamics that irreparably harm others, but we're perpetuating something that continues to keep people in a state of fear on a regular basis. And that the truth of the matter is that when at least in my experience living here as well, people sometimes ask, why is it that, for example, in certain European countries, people are healthier, or they don't, they might eat what seems to be like enormous amounts of olive oil and other stuff, and they're healthier. And I'm like, part of that healthier is because there's not this gorging on other stuff, because the communion with the land, you don't, if I'm going out and I'm killing a cow to eat meat, I don't kill seven of them, like just to have them throw around, right? I kill one, I eat everything. If you're from places like Sardinia or even Sicily, you literally eat everything. I mean, these people will like head, hooves, like every single thing. There is no waste because this animal gave their life. And the same thing goes with the plants, right? I don't go off and cultivate in this way. And I also find it really interesting. I did my master's project on a town called Matera, which is down in the south of Italy. It's one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the entire world. It's a troglodyte culture. It's a culture that was originally in caves, and you can still like go and live in the caves the way people did back in those times. And one of the things that we discovered as I was working on my project, which was really beautiful, is that you had three different types of quote unquote gardening or agriculture. You had outside of the city, you had the stuff that today we think of as agriculture, which is really more a combination of well cultivated things and hunter gatherer, because in that time it was kind of a little bit mixed. Like we were starting to learn that, oh, if I hunted and I gathered in this way, then it would come up on a regular basis, so therefore I could start to sort of cultivate it. I wasn't doing rows, but I was doing that, and that was always outside of the city. Inside of the city, you had two different kinds of garden spaces. One was the one closest to the house, or the one that was in the common area, like in that shared space. And in that area, there was usually the stuff that you used in the kitchen often, like, the herbs and the different kinds of herbs and spices that could be grown, those types of pieces that add on to whatever it is that the meal that you're cooking. And then there was a pensile garden, like a garden up above, that was the contemplation garden. It was the garden of beauty. It was the garden of relationship with the natural world, where I could sit and I could just, be in this environment that was, part of it. And so you had these three different types of relationships, but each one of them required you to also be in relationship with. Because when I would go out, I wasn't forcing the plants to grow in this way. I was, working with the plants to see like, oh, okay, where do you come up? How do I move? Where do I go? How can I concentrate you? How can I bring more of you into my space? And it's like a dance that they were doing in this outside part. And then in the inside, you had the ones that were specifically working very closely with you on your day-to-day food. And then that piece that was about, hey, we need downtime. Human beings and nature take time to renew, to grow, and all those pieces. And so that pensile garden was built for that particular piece. And I always found that so beautiful. I loved working on this project and discovering all these different aspects of it, because it made me really think about how we've distorted the city garden and all these other pieces, but how much we've lost also that herb garden or that dying clothes garden, that garden that should be super close to me, because it's in relation to, it's the medicine, like you said with the witches, like it's my medicine, it's my dying, it's my dying as in dying clothes, not dying as in I die, just to be clear. Like it's what I use to dye clothes and what I, use for cleaning. Like it's like there's all these different elements that I used to get out of that. And we've lost it. We've lost it. And it's hard to reacquire because herbalism seems complicated for people. Oh, I have to memorize all these plants and I've got to do that. Where this was built out of relationship. You might not have ever known the official name of those plants.
Yeah. I'm just thinking as you're talking, two things are popping up. The first is just how amazing it is to watch kids absorb these relationships. Like my daughters are 10 and 13, and I've been doing a foraging class at their school for the past, I don't know, since they were in kindergarten, just taking kids out after school. And all we do is walk around outside and they'll say, "What's this?" We just talk about the plants and the fungi, and whatever we run into, we just learn about it. Even if I don't know what it is, we look it up, we see what people have done with it in the past, what the relationship's been. And my younger daughter, especially, I think, is just called into these relationships more. And, I grew up knowing none of this stuff. And to her, it's kind of almost like boring. Like, so, what do you, someone will, because she knows a lot more than some of the other kids and now, and especially now she's going into fifth grade. So she's like the big kid at school. And I've told her like, okay, you can't really talk at foraging class because like you know too much. You're like,
You're
oh
not the right
me,
audience. You're not the
you
right
know, you're nothing.
audience.
But it's really cool to see how much can shift in one generation of just, and it's not like I know everything by any stretch of the imagination. I've been in relationship with this place where I live now for about 20 years, but it's slow gaining knowledge. I try to learn like one new mushroom a year, but she's like a sponge and she's like, oh yeah, you can do that with this, you can do that with this. And it's like, I love watching her and thinking like, wow, two or three generations of that. And you've rebuilt so many relationships with a place. Um, and the other thing I was thinking about when you're talking about these garden zones is one thing that I got really fascinated by as I started learning about oak trees and humans eating acorns. The friend I mentioned earlier, Ron Reed, who's the Karuk medicine man. So I went out to visit him in California, and I was asking him a lot of questions about how they took care of the oaks, how they tended them. And it turns out that the traditional method of tending oak woodlands and oak grasslands, actually not just where he is, but in most of North America where these systems were prevalent, is with fire.
Mm-hmm.
And he kept telling me fire is medicine, fire is prayer, fire is medicine. He told me about the world renewal ceremonies that his people host every year, where they intentionally light fires in specific places to keep the land healthy. And when I came back, I started looking at, and they had these zones, right? Which is what reminded me. They had the zone close to the villages and the houses where they burned, maybe every year to keep things kind of open and promote certain species. And then in the woodlands, they would burn on maybe a slightly longer rotation because they were trying to create different habitat. And when I got home, I was really surprised to learn that fire was also a part of my home landscape on Cape Cod, and that there was actually a prescribed fire study in an oak forest about a mile from my house. So I convinced them to let me go out on a burn, and they were doing something similar, sort of trying to regain some lost knowledge, burning every year in some plots, every 4 years in some plots. And I ended up just going totally down that rabbit hole too, thinking, okay, if I'm into these oaks, because they're having trouble regenerating because of fire suppression. So in a lot
Right.
of landscapes, these places that, if you go on the Park Service website for the place where I live, it'll say it's natural and pristine, words that suggest, it's better if humans just stay out of it.
Right.
But there's another little subset on the website about the prescribed fire program. And it's like humans have burned here for thousands of years. And these ecosystems need fire to regenerate properly. And so it's this other disconnect, this place where our trauma shows up of like, oh no, these places are wild and pristine. Well, yeah, only if you erase all their indigenous history and like
Exactly.
we don't talk about anything that happened to create them. But I ended up getting certified in prescribed fire, and I've now been going on some of these burns in oak ecosystems, and it's just so exciting to start to study all the little nuances, right? Like, the first day I show up and had no idea what to do, really. Someone said, okay, just hold this drip torch and light this line. And then by like the fifth or sixth time, you're like, okay, I think they're going to say this because the fire's going to move this way and these plants want it there, but these plants don't want it. And it just, it's given me a real respect for the depth and the nuance of knowledge that it takes to really care for a place and get back into relationship with these species. And I've been thinking so much about how it's like, okay, it's taken like 500 years for our relationships to get this out of whack and to be this disconnected. And we have to give ourselves like, I know there's an urgency, and we are in the midst of this climate crisis and this extinction crisis, but at the same time it's like we don't want to hurry back into old patterns. And so I've been trying to think of and kind of live this mantra of like urgency without hurry. Like, it is urgent that we relearn these relationships, but at the same time we don't want to rush it. Like, you got to go at the pace of life and at the pace of relationship. And I think, I don't know, I think it's a good mental space to inhabit when I can get there. And so it's something I've been thinking about a lot.
I love that phrase, urgency without hurry. And as you said, it's all about this relationship. I keep going around and trying with my own work to go in different directions, trying to understand better what is going on and why is it that how do I explain or how do I get to the point of understanding why this relationship with plants, how has it changed my life and why is it so important for others to find their own. And it's all about relationship. It always ends up coming back to relationship. And the fact that, as you just said, I loved how you were describing that after a while you start to understand the nuances of who needs what, right? Oh, these plants over here need, you can tell that they're asking for the fire to come because we need that support. And these over here instead are like, no, no, we're cool. Let us know. And when you're doing that type of work in the way that you're doing it, which has this indigenous sort of slant, this feeling into it, which is where the no hurry, it becomes so important. You do hear that. The whispers of those plants and of those other beings that end up kind of showing you what the landscape looks like, and that your role, the reason why you evolved with two legs and two arms and the ability to hit a flint and create a spark is actually for this. And I think that that's the part that we getting caught up in the whole fear of the ego perspective. Like you said, it's like, oh, E.O. Wilson's Half Earth Project, leave half of the earth completely untouched. But that's only because we humans are still kind of in this disconnection part. If you're in the connection part, then that let this part be includes humans also, because we're just another species that developed with different body parts and different abilities in order to do what maybe a plant being sessile can't do, and can't do it when the plant is sitting and can't run away, and can't do it just the same as I can't move water the way a beaver can. right? I rely on beavers to help me understand how the flow of water should be, just the same as the forest relies on me for my ability to hit flint and to create, controlled fire or movement where many other species can't do that same thing. And I think that rather than us continuously as human beings, I mean, sometimes when I listen to a lot of the discussions around, colonialism and ecofeminism and all this part, which I love in principle, I just keep saying to myself, when do we start talking about what are the skills that we need to reacquire in order to be part of, not good stewards? I'd hate that description too, personally, because again, it implies me above you and but what are the pieces that I need to learn and be a part of, that I re-embody my wildness, and I figure out, okay, I have, 10 fingers and 10 toes and the ability to run and eyes that do, and vision being my primary thing. What am I good for? And what is it that I can bring to my landscape, given my anatomy, physiology, mentality, and all these pieces, that is different from the spider and the moth and the wasp over here that's doing this, and the oak tree over here and the chestnut, and these grasses. And each one of us brings a different set of skills, chemicals that we produce, abilities for us to do that. And I just think we're missing the mark. And so I love what you were describing about your daughter, of like not just learning, but learning in context as part of it, because I do think that that's what we need to change, and it can change very quickly even if we go slow.
Yes, yes, I totally agree with that. And I think for me, part of what was so exciting about the acorn discovery and the oaks and getting back into this relationship was there are kind of like these layers of it, right? Like the first layer was like, wow, we can eat acorns. That's cool. Maybe we are part of this place in ways that I don't understand yet. And then the second layer was like, right, okay, and oaks are keystones. So if we are eating the acorns and we're taking care of oaks, actually, maybe we have like, we're pretty important in this place. Like instead of just being bad for wild spaces or something that the landscape's trying to get rid of. We've all seen those post-apocalyptic movies or books where it's like, oh, the earth finally got rid of humans and it's thriving. And then there was this other layer that I think through conversations with Ron Reed and also the fire practitioners where I live was like, whoa, 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 wait a second. Not only are the oaks important ecologically, but actually in places all over the world, not just the Northern Hemisphere, but in almost every human culture, in every place historically, a part of our job has been to create habitat for other species using fire. And if you look at the history of fire ecology, that's true in Australia, that's true in the Amazon, it's true in the British Isles, it's true all over North America, in this huge diversity of ecosystems. We are in the same category of keystone species as beavers. It's great that you mentioned the beavers because so there's different kinds of keystone species, right? So there's, I don't know, I think your listeners are probably pretty plant savvy. So, there's bees, right? They're mutualists. So they
Right.
provide pollination services. And without those, the ecosystem can really collapse. There's plants like oaks that are this amazing food and habitat source that keep the food web humming. There's predators like sharks, where like if you lose the shark, then it's just overrun with prey and everything falls
Right.
apart. And then there's ecosystem engineers, and we all know other examples. Elephants uproot and trample, and in doing so, they create this regeneration in their
Bison
habitat.
also for the
Yeah,
grasses, and they're stomping through it, end up creating regeneration and aeration for all of the prairie lands.
exactly. Yeah. And beavers, we're all familiar with. But actually, that is our category too. That's our job. We are supposed to be ecosystem engineers. And right now, we're doing our job, but we're doing it really badly, right? Like we're engineering terrible ecosystems because we've forgotten how to do it and how to be in relationship. But that discovery for me and that understanding of like, wait, whoa, we are not just a part of this place, but like we have this critical job. And without us, things get worse for
Mhm.
some other species that we've been in relationship with. And, Ron would always say the oak trees are kin. And I thought, oh, well, that's like a nice, less hierarchical way to look at the world. But the more I started to understand the history of humans and fire and oaks, I was like, oh, we're kin. Like, we've co-evolved together and we all have a job and we're part of a family. And it was like, okay, this is like, there's so many layers, and there's probably more layers to come that I haven't understood yet. But just that building and that, um, this sadness for myself as a kid of growing up with this idea that like the world would be better off without us. And I think so many kids today believe that and think the world would be better off without people. And I think that if we can shift that understanding to like, no, the world would be better off if we were doing our job and if we were back in right relationship with the ecosystems around us. It's a really profound difference in the way that I look at the world now.
Absolutely. And I think as you're doing with your daughter, I also had on a previous episode, Bridget Sherville, who we had who's actually in your neck of the woods. Also, we had a beautiful conversation because she wrote a book on parenting and the climate change. And a lot of it is this curiosity, this relationship with the earth. It's asking questions and being able to kind of not say there's a right or there's a wrong, but more like, why are we doing it that way, and can we do it better, and how do we do it in more relationship? Because I think that that's a big element of all these different pieces that we're talking about. And it's such an important thing for us to experience, because I feel like, people are, the other day I was talking to a friend of mine who was talking to me about how, he hates social media, your typical rant and rave about your social media. And I was just like, look, I'm an addictive social media. I can be, in the sense that I grew up, my family is an addictive television family and can be that. But what I discover about my family is, and it took me a while to get here, is the happier and the more connected we are in general. Sure, we still watch a lot of television because, we love the storylines and we get really into it, but we do it, first of all, in connection, but we don't do it all the time. We do it all the time when we're looking for it from escapism. And that's really what's happening for a lot of people. So it's not the tool, as always, it's all these other elements that we're talking about that kind of almost don't give us the tools. I mean, I know that when I moved, especially when I moved here to Damanhur and to this area of the foothills of the Alps and this, super beautiful land, I was scared. I mean, I was scared because I didn't know how to walk in the forest. Like, nobody had ever taught me. And I go out with this friend of mine who's a woods guide. And of course, he's like, picking things and eating and this. And I still am, when I go by myself, I'm still very cautious because I'm a slow learner to this. I don't, so there are places that I know to go, and certain, acetosella, like over here, and oh, the wild garlic over there, and oh, here's the asparagus. And I know that punjitopo, so many plants that I only know them in certain languages, like punjitopo grows, and when the shoot is very young, it's almost like an asparagus in the way that it's tender, and oh, over here, and then I'll experiment with people who've helped me. I've also helped raise pigs. I've helped slaughter pigs and goats, like, because it's part of it. But it's only because somebody held me by my hand and showed me. And if not, you retreat because you're like, I don't understand and I don't want to get hurt. And the world is telling me that this is dangerous. It's telling me not to pick, or, don't get stung by this, stinging nettle, which of course I've done, in my early days way too many times in trying to learn, oh, what plant are you? Oh, stinging nettle. That's right. That's who you are. Okay. Thank you. But I still think that when we are in that state of more connection, we just naturally find the right rhythm. We naturally become more curious to explore. I still might not pick up a mushroom. I'll call up my friend though, and I'll send them a picture and I'll be like, okay, because here mushrooms, when it rains, like, I'm like, what's this one? He's like, take it. What's this one? Don't take it. Like, okay. And little by little you learn, over time. Field guides are your friend type of perspective. I have several books on the Valquisela Valley for that reason. And then it becomes this game, and you feel so much more reverent also, that it affects everything I do. I end up being more generous with my friends. I end up having more open and loving conversations. I create better connections because all of these little elements kind of bring me back into one, I feel useful as a human being. I don't feel like a pariah on this earth. I don't feel like I'm supposed to be knocked out and I'm supposed to just hide in my house with my computer because I'm not a part of the world, which unfortunately, this message that we keep sending is doing that to people. It is like forcing them into a corner that is exactly what we don't want for them because we keep telling them, you bad, do not go outside, do not touch anything. It's like, no, not that. That's not the right message. It's not the right message, like type of thing. So, on that note, as we start to kind of like close things down, what do you think in this journey that you've been on? What is the biggest, like, what's one message that if you could get it out? I know you wrote a whole book, and for sure, go check out the book. It's in the show notes. It's called Feed Us with Trees. I will put the link for bookshock.org, which of course then lets you support Elspeth and also support us at the same time. So please go and check that out right now. But if you have one kind of one main message you want everybody to hear, what would it be?
I think it would be that the ecosystem where you live needs you,
Mm,
and it needs your presence, and it needs you to figure out what your job in your specific place and in your specific ecosystem is as an ecosystem engineer. And that the fastest way to figure that out and the best place to start is to understand what the keystone species are in your ecosystem, what the keystone plants are, and then start learning how have humans been in relationship with them before, what have those relationships been like, what makes sense now in terms of those relationships. And it might be fire, or you might live in a marsh, and I don't know, you might have a totally different role to play in your wetland ecosystem.
right.
So I think that would be it. I think that's what if I could write a prescription for the world right now, I think that would be it, is just to get to know our places again and to figure out what they need and how we're supposed to inhabit them.
I think that's the most beautiful thing and a message that we don't say enough. The ecosystem where you live needs you. I think that's just so fundamental. And again, it is a reframe from this fear based, don't touch things because you're, an evil human being. But it's more of, like you said, we are ecosystem engineers and we need to learn what is my engineering practice, right? What is it that
Yeah.
I was brought here to do? I'm drawn to this area to live, probably for a reason, right? Either because that's my history and or because I feel like it's somewhere in my body and it calls me to this. So what is my ecosystem's function, the service that I provide to the overall area where I live, and then carry that out. And I guarantee you, you will feel better about life. You will feel much more
Do it.
connected to everybody and to everything when you start doing that. I mean, I guarantee it. I have no doubts about making that claim. And, because so just try. If it doesn't work, let me know. But I'm completely convinced that it is what is going to change anything. Elspeth, I am so like, I have loved this conversation so much because I feel like you touched on so many important aspects of that are about this relationship with food, especially because I feel like as you start working with plants, your relationship with food also gets a little bit scary from the perspective of, most people think that the more I work with animals, actually, the less I'll want to eat them. But, it's actually not always the case because, as you said, once you learn your place in the ecosystem, a new form of relationship starts to happen. And I think that that happens with plants too. You start to work very closely, you start to realize that they're sentient, that they're alive, that they're part of this integral system, that you're part of the system. And all of a sudden, at first, you're like, oh my goodness, what am I going to eat? I'm going to starve. I need to start doing photosynthesis because I need to become a breatharian. Something has to change. But then I think what happens is that as you sort of settle into the ecosystem as part, I live here, I am part of this. And then where is my place? And where is my place in that food, in that chain of that web of life that's being created? Because obviously, just the same as I have this anatomy in order to be able to do something for the ecosystem, to be of service, Also, my eating is of service, right? I, bring down the number of certain kinds of species. I create different sorts of relationships. I might end up, cultivating something to create this ecosystem in a certain way. So I think that there are a lot of elements that is important. So I love that you kind of pass through the food as the channel in which to start to open people to this relationship.
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's been great. So thank you so much. And for everybody who's listening, again, go check out Feed Us with Trees, which is Elspeth Hay's, Hay apostrophe S, because it's not Hayes with an S, Hay apostrophe S, his book. And the links are in the show notes for you to go and check that out. And of course, if you want to have more conversations like this, first, hit the like and the subscribe and the follow and all those good things so that more and more people can learn about this podcast and really start to listen, but also come into the naturally conscious community and be a part of these discussions. The reconnection with plant kin, the human plant relationships, and everything that comes from it, the learning and understanding what it means to be an ecosystem engineer. These are all the conversations that we're having on a regular basis inside the naturally conscious community. And we have continuous stream of different events for you to not just be on this journey by yourself, so that you have more people who are going to be holding your hands and who are also going to be asking you questions. And so come on in and be a part of our ecosystem. So with that, we complete this episode, and I am just so grateful for everything that we've spoken about. And so remember, resist the urge to hold back your emerging green brilliance. Bye. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Reconnect with Plant Wisdom. To continue these conversations, join us in the Naturally Conscious Community, your premier online ecosystem for plant reawakening and accelerated evolution and co-creation with other kin. Here, you'll find expansive discussions, interactive courses, live events, and supportive group programs like the Plant Wisdom Book Club and the Sprouts Writing and Creativity Group. Connect with like-minded individuals collaborating with plants to integrate these insights into life. Intro and outro music by Steve Shuley and Poinsettia from The Singing Life of Plants. That's it for me, Tigria Gardenia, and my plant collaborators. Until next time, remember, resist the urge to hold back your emerging green brilliance. I'm out. Bye.